Good morning everyone and welcome to Sprint Refresh for 2015. My name is Alison Ledger, I'm the Training Coordinator here at Attaché, and of course this is Stream A and it is the payroll review to start off in Session 1. With me today I have Michelle Levers. A number of you will be quite familiar with Michelle. She's been working with me at Attaché now for the last 7 or 8 years, so between the two of us we'll be able to help you with your payroll questions today. Just for those people, today we are live streaming this session as well out to hundreds of our clients out there on the internet. So just for those people who are streaming us, and if you can't see me and my screen at this stage, you need to log out of the session that you were in this morning, go back to the lobby page and select Stream A for payroll and Stream B for the account session. So just make sure, if you're not seeing me, to log out and select Stream A or Stream B. Alrighty, so this session that we're going to take you through this morning is a review of your payroll setups. Now, of course, when you registered for this session, you received an email from us and it gave you some notes, pre-course notes to download, and they are just short, sharp notes for you to follow through today. But what will happen at the end of today, you will receive an email from us, and that email will contain a survey, and when you complete that survey, you will then be able to download a whole heap of notes. So today, don't be worried about concentrating on getting word for word notes. You will get a set of notes based on each session today. So that's, of course, after you fill in the survey. If you don't fill in the survey, you don't get any notes. So we are quite happy to, Michelle and I are quite happy to take questions as we go along, not only from the people in the room, but the people who are streaming us as well. You are quite welcome to submit questions through the streaming session, and we will answer them if we have time. If we can't get back to you today, we will get back to you later on. You will notice that on my screen as well, I do have Attaché BI, and that's what I will be using today. But for those of you in the room who have not moved to Attaché BI, 95% of today is all based on your current Attaché payroll. So if there is something that I show today that is not in Attaché payroll and is unique to Attaché BI, I will point that out to you. Okay, alrighty, so let's get this session underway. So what we're going to do is, as I mentioned, we are going to go back to the very beginning of how your payroll is set up. So for those of you who have been using our payroll for quite a while, you might have inherited this payroll and you wonder why it does the things it does. And for those of you who are new to payroll, this also might explain why your payroll does the things it does. The main things that I'm going to point out is making sure that you're Superstream compliant, that you are Fair Work compliant, and also little tips and tricks, things that might not be turned on in your payroll system that can make your daily processing of payrolls a lot easier. So let's go through and start this little session. Alrighty, of course we need to make sure that we are in Australia for our Australian payroll by choosing the relevant country. If you choose New Zealand, of course you will get all the New Zealand tax scales and their reporting options. But of course we'll stick to the Australian payroll today. Sorry, Kelly. When it comes to putting time into the payroll, you have a choice. You can enter time into the payroll either in decimals or in as minutes. So if someone works 90 minutes overtime, if it's set to decimals, you will key 1.5, meaning 1.5 hours. If it's set to minutes, you would key 1.3, meaning 1 hour and 30 minutes. Now, when it comes to your pay advices for your employees, this base rate the rate to display on the pay slips should be set to actual pay rate. Okay, so under Fair Work, you must show the actual pay rate, not the base pay rate. So that means that when you print the pay slips for your employees, they will always see what the hourly rate was for that bit of work that they did. So if someone's normal hourly rate is $20 an hour and they worked an hour and a half overtime at time and a half, the pay slip would see 1.5 times their the actual rate, $30. Okay, so it should be set to actual pay rate. Of course, we still allow you to pay your employees by cash or cheque if you wish to, but the majority of us all get paid with our monies being transferred into our bank account. Now, talking about groups, of course, your payroll might contain 100 employees, and yes, you can administer those employees as individuals. But what we can also do is we can use payroll groups to help you manage those employees. So, for example, if you were doing the payroll for Woolies, you'd have a group for 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. You would set up those groups with all the relevant pay rates, with all the relevant allowances, with all the relevant leave details. And as you get a new employee, you attach the employee to that group. And that means that employee would pick up all the pay rates relevant to that group of employees. So each time they have a birthday, all you have to do is move the employee from one group to another. The other thing is, if there are pay rises, you change it at the group level and it will flow through to all employees that are attached to that group. The other thing that you can do with groups as well is you can use groups to set up different pay rates in your organisation, and an employee can belong to multiple groups. So that means that if you were doing the payroll for a hotel, for example, you will have an employee who might work on the front desk, they might work in the bistro, they might do some cleaning, and they are different pay rates for each of those different tasks. So when you get the timesheet from the employee, you could just key that they worked 15 hours in the restaurant, they did 20 hours in doing cleaning, and the software would pick up the relevant rate for those different tasks. So that's why an employee can belong to multiple groups if you use groups to set up different pay rates in the payroll. Multi-location. So you would turn on multi-location if you had a branch here in Sydney, one in Newcastle, one in Wollongong. So that would allow you to get management reporting for each of those locations. Also, if you have payroll going across different states, you would put your employees into the different locations for different states, and of course that would help you with your reporting for your payroll tax and things like that. So you use locations to manage different groups of employees. I think some of you, what you've tried to do is to use pay points on the employee master file to group your employees, and what you'll notice is that you can't print a lot of our reports by pay point, so that's not what pay points were designed for. You use locations if you want to group your employees. Costing. So when it comes to your payroll, if your management or your finance team want your payroll to be split into different cost centres, so your company will know how much the admin team costs them, how much the sales team costs them, you should be splitting your payroll as you are processing. What we don't want you to do is to process one big payroll and someone then manually splits it afterwards. So if you turn on costing in the payroll, when you add a new employee to the payroll, you can attach them to a default cost centre. So that means that when you process their pays, you will then be able to work out how much the admin team cost you, how much the sales team cost you. And of course, an employee can work in multiple cost centres during the same pay period. So they might do 20 hours in admin and 20 hours in the sales team in a week. So the cost of their wages then will be split 50-50 across those two cost centres. Now, by ticking the costing option here, it will turn on cost centres in the payroll and allow you to attach employees to cost centres and get costing reports out of the payroll. For those of you who use the Attaché General Ledger, you can, of course, turn on the General Ledger option here, and, of course, you can attach General Ledger codes to each of those cost centres and transfer all of that to our Attaché General Ledger. For those of you who don't use the Attaché General Ledger, you can still add all of your General Ledger codes to the Attaché payroll, and when you finish processing your payroll, instead of transferring all those debits and credits to the Attaché General Ledger, you will just print a report, and that will give you a debit and a credit journal for your finance team to do a manual journal in whatever accounting package you use. So you can still turn on General Ledger even if you don't have the Attaché General Ledger, and get all your debits and your credit reports. So we'll look at General Ledger a little bit later on in the day and how it works with your payroll. By turning this option on here, as I said, it will generate a debit and a credit report for your payroll journals. This tick box will generate those transactions as at the pay period ending date, but by ticking this box, the transactions will be generated as at date paid. So it's whatever the date of the transactions you want for your General Ledger. So you take the people that get paid monthly, we would always have it set to date paid because we get paid on the 15th of the month for the pay period ending the 31st of October. So we would want the transactions dated the 15th, the date that we got paid. Okay. Okay, this option here is for those of you who import timesheets into our payroll. There are a number of systems that talk to the Attaché payroll for those of you who wish to import timesheets into the payroll. And this is all about, this tick box is about how it displays, the lines display on the employee's payslip. By ticking this option here, the time that comes in from the importation, or the hours worked, will be above the bank lines and the superannuation lines on the payslip. Okay? In the old days, it used to always come in back to front, if you like. So we now give you the option to bring it in with all the hours worked above the bank lines and above the superannuation lines. Enable super payment date on pay advice. So currently, when it comes to superannuation and your pay advices, you must print the type of superannuation on the pay advice, so whether it's super guarantee, whether it's salary sacrifice, and you must print the name of the fund that the money is going to. But what we are also waiting to hear, it was supposed to come in about 18 months ago or 200 days ago, but we had a change of government. We are waiting to hear whether you have to print the date that you pay the super. So if that comes into legislation, our software is ready to go. So we will send you an email just to turn the option on. Confirm master file addition. So just when you add a new employee, it will just ask you, are you sure? Do you really want to add this employee? Edit notes in inquiry and view the notes in inquiry. Of course, on the employee master file, you have an F4 option to add a note about an employee. So whether that employee, you've made a note that they're on leave without pay because they've got no more sick leave left, or they've been spoken to about their attendance. So if you record notes like that in the payroll, we give you the option that people who don't necessarily process the pays can view those notes and edit those notes. So whether you allow a manager or a separate HR person to look at those notes, edit those notes, you can do that based on different password levels. If you give them access to view and edit the notes, they won't have access to the rest of the payroll. They can't do any transactions, they can't change any master file information. So you have that option there. This enable output F11 in master file find, of course that label doesn't mean much to a lot of people, and of course it was written by one of our programmers, so we just haven't got around to changing it. But what it enables you to do is to print a very simple report. It enables a report wizard from the employee's master file. So if I go to the employee's master file, whether I go to inquire or maintain, and when I go F2 on the employee code field, it will bring up my list, and you'll see down the bottom that I have an F11 output option. And then, of course, if I wanted a list of employees and their normal hourly rate, I just tick that box and choose finish, and I get a very simple report. So when you go F2 on the master file, and what I can also do, if all of your staff were getting let's say a very generous 10% pay rise, I could dump that back out into Excel, maybe if my system goes. And of course I could do my formulas, and anything that we have in Excel, we can get back into Attaché. So for those of you who have moved to Attaché BI, it is a lot simpler to import back into Attaché from Excel. For those of you who are on Attaché Payroll, we just have to set up the template and you can bring it back in. So if you have to make global changes to anything in your payroll, we can easily do that. Okay, so you don't have to sit there and manually change everything one at a time.
So does that include importing bonuses?
Yeah, we can import into timesheets and everything as well. So the anywhere you can do data entry in Attaché, whether it's Attaché Payroll or Attaché Accounts, if you have stuff or data in another system, whether it's in Excel, whether it's in Access, whether it's coming from a time clock or an online rostering system, we can import into the payroll. So what we would prefer is none of you do double entry. If someone has keyed it once, you shouldn't have to key it again. So if it's already in one system, then it should be imported into our payroll, okay? Because that's where all your mistakes happen. Once you start having to do double entry, that's where all your reconciliation problems happen. So speak to any of the Attaché staff here about importing into Attaché Payroll. Once it's set up once, it's just always that press of a button. The next option that you've got there is the amended payment summary. Of course, that comes into play at the end of the financial year. If you have issued all your payment summaries to your employees, sent everything off to the tax office, and you realise that you've made a mistake, that's when you would come here and you would turn the option on to create an amended payment summary. So what you would do is you would put the correction in the payroll, so whether you overpaid or underpaid somebody, then you would create an amended payment summary, and when you print it, of course, it will come out with the words amended payment summary on it. and of course send all the information off to the tax office. So by rights, I only turn it on when I need to, okay? Leaving it turned on gets a little bit dangerous. For those of you who do use the Attaché General Ledger, you can now tell the Attaché Payroll where your General Ledger sits on your system, so you can look up your chart of accounts. So that's what that's there for. The options down the right-hand side are all fairly self-explanatory about cash and currency and year-to-date calculations. Alrighty, so going down to the next screen, the first options there are user-defined income categories. Now, when you set your payroll up, you can set up hundreds of different types of income type codes. And what we ask you to do then is to group those or categorise them based on about a dozen predefined income categories. So the payroll comes with income categories for normal hours, workers' comp, annual leave, and about 10 more. But what we do here is we give you two options if you need extra ones. You can label these whatever you wish to. So you'll see there with income category 1, I've labelled that paternity leave. Okay, so there's no specific category for paternity leave, so you can do that. Or you can do what I've done in option number 2, I've just classed it as other leave. So all bereavement leave, paternity leave, maternity leave, all goes to other leave. So those income categories are used for reporting purposes and inquiry purposes. So it's just a matter of if you needed extra ones, people use it. Another one is time in lieu. You can set up an income category for time in lieu. Now, these user-defined employee fields. Now, when you label these fields will appear on the employee's master file for you to add extra information about your employees. Now, for those of you who are still on a Attaché payroll, we would always suggest that you label them job title, except I can't type, job title and name of the award. Because under Fair Work, on your pay advices, you must print the employee's job title and you must print the name of the award that they are employed under if they come under an award. So for those of you on Attaché payroll who have yet to move to BI, we would suggest that you label those two fields that, and then on the employee's master file, you can record that information. And when you print your pay advices, there is a tick box that says print those fields. Now, for those of you who have moved to BI, Attaché payroll, we have put those two fields, job title and name of the award, as permanent fields. We have added them to the employee master file, okay? Which means that these three fields are back to you to use for whatever purpose you need to. So one of the options that people put in is the preferred name. So when you print staff lists, sometimes you don't want to print people's real names, so all the Matthews that work for you, they come out in the staff list as Matt instead of Matthew. I know people get upset about that. So, and if it's a requirement for your people to have a driver's licence, of course you can label those fields. So you'll see there that I've done that. I've labelled the fields preferred name and driver's licence. Field number 3, I have left blank. Now, because I've left that blank, when I go to my employee's master file, you'll see that that field is not there. So if you go back to your office and that space on your master file is blank, it is blank because you don't have any labels in those fields in your payroll options. Okay? So that's what that is. Alrighty, now your superannuation's calculations based on, this should be set to date paid. And of course that is for the calculation of the 450 threshold for your superannuation. So remember, everything the tax office does is based on date paid. They don't care what your pay period ending dates are. It's the same as when you get to the end of the financial year. If you're processing a pay on the 1st of July for the pay period ending the 29th of June, it goes in this financial year. They base everything on date paid. Okay, so just be mindful of that. These are your general ledger accounts. As I mentioned earlier, we are doing a session on general ledger and payroll a little bit later today. But as I mentioned, for those of you who don't use our general ledger, you can still record your GL codes here by turning on that general ledger option on page number 1 of these. So we'll talk more about those a little bit later today. Now, when it comes to warning messages, so whether you want to see warning messages when you are processing the payroll, some people like warning messages, some people don't. So do you want to see a warning message if people exceed their base hours for the pay period ending date? Do you want to see a warning message if people exceed their annual leave, sick leave or long service leave balance for that pay period, their entitlement, sorry? Overriding cost centres and overriding employee groups. By turning these two options to yes, it means that an employee can work in multiple cost centres during the same pay period, and they can work in multiple groups during the same pay period. Allow multiple timesheets. Now, by rights, this should always be set to no. Each employee should only have one timesheet for each pay period, because if there are multiple timesheets for the same pay period, there will be, of course, tax implications. So each employee really should only have one timesheet for the same pay period. But sometimes you might like to do 2 timesheets, and the main reason you would is some people do a separate timesheet for a termination pay. So if the termination pay is a fairly complicated one, like a redundancy or a dismissal or something like that, what you might do is do one timesheet for their normal pay for that pay period, and then come back and do a second timesheet just for their termination. And that means that the employee gets 2 pay slips, and sometimes it's easier to explain it to an employee if they're not real bright. So sometimes 2 pay slips makes it easier, as I said, if a termination is a fairly complicated one, such as genuine redundancies or something like that. Display in timesheet hours. So when you're working with timesheets, down the bottom right-hand corner, do you want to see total hours worked or total hours paid? And I suppose that option comes into play for those of you who do RDOs. So, for example, if you're doing a weekly pay for the weeks and someone takes an RDO in that week, if it's set to total hours worked, it would show 32 hours. Okay, so what do you want to see? The other thing that we've added to the payroll as well, especially for our long-term users of the Attaché payroll, when you open a timesheet, the software always defaulted to the insert mode, that every time you had to modify a line, you had to choose F5 to change. Well, now you can open the timesheet in modify mode. So you'll see later on today when we set up our standard pays, if you set the standard pay up the way that we would like you to, we would suggest that you always have it set to open your timesheets in modify mode. So then you don't have to keep hitting your F5 key. Alrighty, of course these are all our tax scales. Each financial year we email you and let you know about new tax scales that are available. So these are all, of course, programmed by us. But what you'll see on the right-hand side there is an email address in regards to Superstream reporting. So, of course, by the end of October, everyone has to have a Superstream compliant solution in place. And of course that means that you are paying your super electronically and of course in a specific file format with specific details governed by the ATO. And one of the fields that is in that file that you send off to pay your super is an email address. Now you have two options. You can set up a generic email address and just type in your email address here, payroll@company.com.au, or you can choose the employee document delivery address, which means it will pick up the email address that you have on the employee's master file that you are currently emailing pay advices to. So that email address is included in the file that you send off to pay your super, and if there's any queries about that payment or that superannuation contribution, where do you want that query to go? Do you want it to go back to you, or do you want it to go to the individual employee? So you must have an email address in the file, and if you are using the two solutions from the Attaché payroll, either Click Super or the alternate file format, that field is included because it has to be under Superstream. If you have another solution, if you are doing manuals, you must be providing an email address. Okay, so is everyone clear on that? So you just need to make sure. We will talk more about Superstream compliance a little bit later today as well. Included in our tax scales, of course, are all our HEX component as well. So if you ever get a query from an employee about how come I didn't pay any HEX this week, and how come I paid a lot of extra tax, the month before. So you can see here, these weekly thresholds are based on weekly earnings. So you'll see from $11.59, they pay an extra 4% tax and so on. So as they earn more money, they pay more tax. So as all the software does is look at how much they earned in this pay period and add the relevant HEX component to their normal tax. Okay, so it's on a sliding scale. So if their salary fluctuates throughout the year, their HEX component will fluctuate as well. It's not a standard amount. Okay, it depends on what you earn. So if someone asks you when does it kick in and when doesn't it, you can show them that, and that will tell them. The next one is the Student Financial Supplement Scheme. This scheme was discontinued in about 2006 or 3 or something, a long time ago. So you might have some older employees that's still paying off their debt, but there's not very many of them now. So there are our payroll options. As I said, some of you have been using this software for quite a while, and I suppose it's just a good idea to review those payroll options every time you do an upgrade, because a lot of the times when we put new features into the payroll, they just aren't automatically turned on. You have to come here and turn them on. So just be mindful of that. And of course, when you do those upgrades, you're supposed to read the notes that go with the upgrades, and you're supposed to read the notes prior to doing the upgrade, okay? That's the idea of all the notes. Okay, so is there any queries about any of those options there? So as I mentioned, you will get this document that will take you through step by step for each of those fields that are on there. We're good? All right. Okay, let's go and have a look at our income types. As I mentioned before, you can have as many types of income type codes, as you wish. The thing is, as well, when you're adding any code to the payroll, so whether it's an income type code or an allowance or a bank account or a cost centre, think about your coding and the way that you set it up. So you'll see on that screen there, we've set up overtime, and of course what we've done is we've started it all with OT. And that makes your reporting so much easier. If you have a set way to code things, then everyone knows the procedure to follow, and it allows your reporting to be so much easier. So if we just choose the overtime code, once you've entered an income type code, you then need to attach it to one of the predefined or one of your user-defined income categories. So as I said, you can have hundreds of different income type codes, but then you need to group them against one of the predefined income categories. Okay? How you put time, this is the rate multiplier. Because this is overtime for time and a half, you'll see that the rate multiplier is 1.5. I'll come back and talk about that additional amount field in just a moment. Now, when it comes to your pay advices, of course, you must show the hours worked and you must show the rate on the employee's payslip as well. Throughout the software on income type codes, allowances, deductions and superannuation employer contributions, you will see this option to show year-to-date figures. Now, what this will allow you to do is to show itemised year-to-date figures. So if you want to show your employees on their pay slips, year-to-date overtime worked, year-to-date normal hours, the main ones that I turn it on for is I will show year-to-date figures, itemised figures for superannuation, all the different types of superannuation. So I will show year-to-date salary sacrifice, year-to-date super guarantee, so the employees can reconcile that back to their statements from their super funds. Now the Consolidate on pay advice. So if your employees work in multiple cost centres during a pay period, you have that information in the payroll, and of course you will get all those different reports. So the employee could work in 3 or 4 different cost centres in the same pay period. But when they print their pay slips, they don't need to see that detail. They just need to see that they worked 76 hours and they earned X amount of dollars. So by consolidating on the pay advice, that will consolidate line types of the same. So all normal hours will be consolidated into one. I'll just skip these ones for the time being and I'll come back to them. I just wanted to talk about these superannuation ones. The other thing is when you add income types, allowances and deductions to the payroll, you'll see that we have this include in OTE. So by including it in ordinary time earnings, it means that 9.5% super guarantee will be calculated on that pay element. So as you add an income type, an allowance and a deduction, you will see this option, including OTE. If I tick it, that means that the 9.5 super guarantee will be calculated on that pay element. If I leave it unticked, no super will be calculated on that. So remember, your super is calculated on ordinary time earnings, and the ATO has a list of what they define as ordinary time earnings. And of course, if you have employees employed under EBAs or awards, they might stipulate what the super is to be calculated on as well. What you'll see there, though, when I've set this overtime up, even though I've said it's not included in OTE, but it is included in the SG threshold. And the way this is set up, this overtime is set up, that overtime is used to see, is included in the calculations to see if the employee goes over the 450 threshold, but it's not included in the 9.5% calculations. So some pay elements will be used to calculate whether they go over the 450 threshold, but they will be excluded from the 9.5% super calculations. Okay? So you need to make sure that you've got your head around all of that. So as I said, the ATO has a list of what they define as ordinary time earnings. And so you just need to make sure that you are clear what your company pays super on and what they don't. So we will talk more about super a little bit later on. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that everybody has set up correctly is that when you put annual leave into a timesheet, does it automatically reduce your normal hours? Is that what is happening for everybody? So that's right. So if I go to a timesheet here and I do modify this one. So when I put in annual leave for this person, 7.6, it has, if I come down, it has reduced his normal hours by 7.6 automatically. So making sure that your income types are set up with reduced hours with leave, and that will allow, every time you put leave into the payroll, it will automatically reduce your normal hours. The other thing as well with the consolidation, when it comes to all your leave types, such as annual leave and sick leave, if you have allow date entry turned on, so when you put leave into a timesheet, it will allow you to put from and to dates. If those from and to dates are different, they will then have 2 lines on your payslip. It won't consolidate. Okay, so you should be able, when you put leave into a timesheet, you should be able to put your from and to dates, and it should be automatically reducing your normal hours. Okay. So we'll just quickly go across to allowances as well, and we'll do more on allowances a little bit later on. So again, when it comes to setting up your allowances, now again, you must know the difference between what is income for your employees and what is an allowance. So again, if you go to the ATO website and if you search payment summaries, they will list what they consider to be an allowance and what they consider to be income, which is part of like their gross earnings. The main things when it comes to setting up your allowances, there are all these different ways that you can calculate allowances based on percentage of hours worked, or dollar value based on hours worked, or this new one that we've added, a percent of the normal rate based on the quantity. So there's all these different ways that you can calculate these allowances. The main things are that you must know whether it's before or after tax. There's not much these days that is after tax. You either pay it today or you'll pay it at the end of the financial year. So everything is mostly before tax. Again, whether you include it in ordinary time earnings, whether there is super to be calculated on it. And the other thing that you need to know about is what happens at the end of the financial year when you print your payment summaries. Is that allowance just to be included in the employee's total gross, or is it to be itemised on the pay advices? And that, on the payment summaries, sorry. And that's what that the ATO will tell you, the different types of allowances. Some have to be itemised, some are to be included just in the gross earnings. Okay. And of course you have all these other options over here, show year to date on pay advices. So if you have sales reps on the road, some of them always want to know how much sales commissions they have earned during the year, so you can tick that box. For those of you who pay back pay bonuses and commissions, of course, they were... I'll just set one up for a bonus. So back in July, the 1st of July 2013, 14? 13? 14. 13. So a couple of years ago, bonuses, commissions and back pay, it was changed the way that they were taxed, okay? So by setting up a code and allowance for a bonus, back pay and commissions, and by ticking that box, it uses our tax scales, which means there is no manual calculation on your part when it comes to spanning bonuses, commissions over a number of tax periods. So if you pay your employees bonuses, commissions or back pay, set it up as an allowance, ticking that box, and then it will look at our tax scales to tax them accordingly, and you won't have to do any manual calculations. The main thing that you must remember to do when you are paying either a bonus or a back pay, it can't be a single line on a timesheet. It must be incorporated into their standard pay so we can work out their pay periods, okay? So you must include it in a standard pay so we can work out the pay periods or the pay frequency for that employee and tax them accordingly. So we will do some more on allowances a little bit later on today as well. So just be mindful of that the tax scales now are able to be set up as an allowance, and the software will calculate the tax for you, and you don't have to do any manual calculations. So is there any queries about any of that I've just covered? Nothing from our online people? Oh, must be good. Alrighty then, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a break, and then we'll be back at 11:30 for our favourite subject of termination pays. So yes, we'll have a break and I'll see you at 11:30.